Now, in today's webinar, we'll be focusing on public community legal education. So what do we mean by community legal education, or CLE? Well, CLE can be any program or event that seeks to increase the public's understanding of the law or of the justice system and its processes. So obviously it covers a very wide range of possible topics. More broadly, CLE is a key strategy that's used to improve access to justice. The research evidence really clearly shows that how people understand and think about law affects their legal problem-solving behaviour, and whether or not they'll try to use the law and the justice system to solve their problems. Our research team does a lot of work in this area, and these are things that are being explored in our public understanding of the law survey that will be conducted later this year. Now, today we're focusing on CLE programs and events that are open to the public or of the public, and that's the Victorian Law Week model. We'll talk a bit more about this later, but when it comes to CLE, it's important not to think about the public as a single entity, but instead to think in terms of the different groups who make up the public. And the reason for that is that people have quite different experiences and experience quite different barriers. In this webinar today, we won't be dealing with CLE programs that are delivered to closed invitation-only groups, such as those programs that are delivered in-house to staff and stakeholders of a particular organisation. Now, before we get into it, just a really brief overview about how today's session will run. To start with, you'll hear from me and our communications manager, Matt Hurst. We will be talking briefly about how to characterise your CLE activity to help you engage with your audience. And we'll also be giving you some tips for attracting the right people. Now, those tips are based on key learnings that have come out of Law Week. Over time, we've had the benefit of working with a whole range of different organisations who've delivered Law Week events. So we've seen what's worked well and what hasn't worked quite as well. Then you'll hear from Mick Paskos from On Message Media. Mick has been the Law Week publicist for many years now, and he'll give you some tips on engaging with the media and obtaining media coverage for your CLE activity. And after that, you'll hear from Nadia Morales from Inner Melbourne Community Legal. Nadia will talk about her own experiences with public CLE programs and the strategies she's used to engage her target audience. We do have a packed program for you today, so unfortunately we won't have time to take questions during the webinar, but please do get in touch with us afterwards if you'd like to discuss anything. Okay, so before you can even think about how you want to attract an audience to your CLE activity, it's really important to have a clear idea of exactly who it is you want to attend, and to try and define your ideal audience in as much detail as you possibly can. So what do you want them to learn, and what, if anything, would you like them to do? So what you're really asking is, who needs to know the information you're sharing? Now, if you are trying to raise awareness about your organisation and the help that it can provide, your organisation's own data is a really great place to start when you're working that out. So for example, you might want to look at whether the data shows that there are certain groups who are not currently engaging with your organisation, but you think they should be. You might want to look at whether the data shows that there are certain groups who have difficulty accessing your services properly, or ask a lot of questions about how to access your services. In our experience, we've found that it can be really, really difficult to attract an audience to a general awareness raising event about a particular organisation. So really having a clear idea of your target audience means that you can design and you can market your event so that you draw in a particular group. Okay, but what if you want to tell everyone about what you do or how to deal with a particular legal problem? While information you're sharing may very well be relevant to a whole range of people, if you want to communicate it effectively, you need to do so in a way that's appropriate for and also really useful for your primary or your target audience or audiences. And you just can't speak effectively to everyone in the same way. The research also indicates that CLE can be more effective when it's targeted and tailored to the audience's needs and capabilities. Now, you certainly would not be able to speak effectively to these two people if you spoke to them in the same way. Some of you might have seen these images before, but they're really helpful because they show clearly that different groups have different communication needs, as well as different legal needs. At the end of the day, if you try to speak to everyone, you run the risk that you'll end up connecting with almost no one. Now, many of you will know the CLE framework that was developed by Hugh McDonald, who is now our principal researcher at the Victoria Law Foundation, and by Suzie Forell, who is now the Research Director of Health Justice Australia. Now, that framework groups CLE into three broad categories. So CLE that's designed to self-help, so to improve your target audience's own legal knowledge and to empower them to help themselves. Then there's CLE that's designed to get help or to reinforce help. So to build awareness of organisations that can provide legal assistance and also to build trust in those organisations. And finally, we have CLE that's designed to give help. So to equip others to connect people with legal assistance services and dispute resolution processes. So there we're talking about the problem notices. At this point, it is just worthwhile flagging that if you're wanting to engage with people who are joined up with other services, you might want to consider whether it would be more effective to target your event at the service providers rather than the individuals themselves. But again, that depends on what you want to achieve and what you think the best strategy is. It is really worthwhile thinking about which of these categories your CLE activity falls into, because that will affect the messaging and language you use in your marketing. When you're working out how to engage your target audience, it can also be helpful to think about whether you're providing the information just in time or just in case. Because again, that will also affect how you position your event and how you try and engage your audience. So CLE that's just in time is designed to help with a person's current legal issues. So it's designed for people who already know they have a current legal problem and need immediate information or immediate help. It's also designed to help someone realise they have a legal problem and let them know about the services available that can provide immediate help. And it's also designed to educate problem notices to recognise their clients' existing legal issues and know where to refer them for help. CLE that's just in case is more future focused. It's designed to prevent problems and to encourage action when they occur. So thinking about the timing aspect is important. Again, the research shows that people really are just often not interested in many aspects of law until they're directly relevant to them. So particularly if your CLE is just in case, it's a really good idea to think of a hook that will pique your target audience interest and make them want to attend. So I'm now going to pass you on to Matt Hurst, our communications manager, and Matt's going to talk about language, positioning, and marketing channels. Thanks, Matt.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lisa, and hopefully you can all hear me clearly. I'm just getting a few things set up. As Lisa mentioned, I'm here to speak about basically how to speak effectively to your audience. Now, really what we're looking at is pretty much getting people there. So when promoting an event, it's important to use language that is appropriate for the audience and that's commonly used by them, so that it's easier for them to understand whether it's actually relevant for them. Is this event really even for me? This is especially true when it comes to how the event is titled and framed. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be inauthentic and start speaking in slang or language unfamiliar to you, because that really sometimes does not sit well at all. And there's probably some pretty famous examples out there of when people try and connect and fail. As a bit of background, I'm not trained as a lawyer, so I'm unfamiliar with a lot of legal terminology. And each law week, I watch events come in as they're registered. And from a quick glance at an event title, I may struggle to understand what it's about and who it's for. And it's only once I read further into the blurb that I'll figure it out. Now, when you're marketing an event, you may not get that luxury of time and attention because you're entering a contested space where you're fighting to attract the interest. So no matter how important or valuable you think the information is, the challenge is to make your audience understand that and commit their time to it. So something that we've been thinking about a lot is really when you're describing a legal issue, a helpful way to think about it is to ask, what words would my target audience type into Google if they were looking for information about this topic or to solve this issue? So they're probably not going to search for something like new rules under the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act 2018. They're more likely to search the issues that affect them. Can my landlord kick me out for no reason? Do I need permission to put a picture up in my rental? How frequently can my landlord increase my rent? So also think about why your audience will want to come to your CLE activity and make it sound valuable to them. So consider how your event will meet the specific legal needs of your audience and what you want them to get out of the event. So, and you'll use that in your messaging, however you share it. And it may be that they don't even know that they even have a legal need for this information. So really what we're talking about is put yourself in their shoes, focus on the issues they care about and make it relevant and interesting to them. For example, if you're to run a session on wills for parents of young children, hook into the issues that will concern them. How will you ensure that your kids are looked after when you die? A hook like that makes the event seem vitally important because it emphasises the stakes. What if I don't do this? As a new parent, that's the one message that really connects with me and sort of can leave me lying awake at night, so I should find out more information. I will admit this is a small sample size, but this is the example that I like to use. It's also a good idea to create a voice you will use to talk to your audience. And what we're basically speaking about is the tone you're going for. Would a more relaxed, informal approach work well for your audience? Or is a direct, professional, authoritative voice better? As with all effective communication, if there is a mismatch between the voice, the topic, and the audience, there's a risk that your audience will switch off, or worse, that you'll fail to hook them in the first place. So really that's the sort of summary of the language to use. And now we're really sort of considering how do we reach the audience? And this is really about marketing channels. So if you have a clear idea of your audience and how you'll speak to them, you actually need to find ways to reach them. So something that we've noticed a lot in Law Week that works very well is basing your approach on meeting your audience where they already are. Find the places and groups that your audience already interacts with and market to them there. And this is really the key takeaway from today's session around marketing your event. So think about whether there are organisations that already engage with your audience. Can you access that audience through that organisation? And how does your audience access information? Are they computer literate and do they have easy access to the internet? Do they get their news from a Twitter feed or a newspaper or somewhere else? Are they more likely to see a picture on Instagram or on the wall of their local cafe? Are there particular places they frequent, for example, to socialise or for education or to get help? The key is to reach out to a range of different organisations and channels who are already connected with your target audience and, importantly, are trusted by them. This trust aspect can be very beneficial because the legitimacy and credibility that that organisation has built up can transfer to your event and your organisation. So this is the concept of trust transfer. So basically, it's a seal of approval. The research Lisa spoke about earlier indicates that trust and confidence can be particularly important if you're trying to engage disadvantaged, vulnerable, or marginalised members of the community. So building rapport, developing relationships, and demonstrating genuine commitment can help enlist the support of the organisations. If you can establish that you have a common interest as well in providing useful and free information to that same group, we've often found that they will be more inclined to share your information about your event for free. So who might you want to approach? Here are some options you could consider. Community groups that your audience are part of is quite a big area. So for example, if you want to engage seniors in a particular area, are there local seniors groups? Maybe there are social support groups for specific culturally and linguistically diverse communities if they're your audience. One Law Week event run in 2019 was very successful, and they approached local sports clubs and particularly football clubs as they recognised them as a key avenue to the target audience that they wanted at the event. Businesses or organisations that connect with your audience are another group to think about. For example, if you're a private law firm or a community legal centre, think about your referral networks and use them. If you're a family lawyer who gets a lot of referrals from accountants and their client base is your target audience, see if you can prepare information about your CLE activity that they can send out to their databases or include in newsletters. Basically, can you help them assist their clients? It can be a value add for businesses to highlight opportunities for free legal help that their client base will be interested in. So there's that mutual benefit that you can discuss. Organisations or individuals with large relevant followings, and my apologies to Ben Law here, his image has come up a little bit unusually on my screen. So we're looking at prominent individuals who advocate about certain issues. We've included Benjamin Law here. He spoke at an event of ours earlier this year, and he's a campaigner for LGBTIQ inclusion and diversity. So if your event was on a topic like that, maybe they'd be interested in being able to do something to share. And don't forget about local councillors, politicians, local advocates and campaigners. They're very active in the community and they're also very responsive to community needs. So they will often look for these types of opportunities to share information that will be of benefit to the community. There are a lot of online options available as well. So here we're thinking about social media pages and groups, along with websites and forums. So this distinction here between a couple of these is to look at is whether the content is curated by a person or a group. So that would be a website or certain social media pages, or if it's areas where you can post yourself, and that's such as a Facebook group or on a web forum. Now, people are always asking for help in Facebook groups. So you can consider whether there are any community groups for residents of your local area, particular hobby or interest groups that are relevant, maybe university student groups or other relevant other groups that are relevant to the subject matter of your CLE. Now, just be aware when you're looking to post in these that there may be rules or customs of the group that you need to follow. So some might not let you post links to your events, so it's always worth checking that out. But it is a very rich avenue for being able to go in and actually go to a place where people really trust that information and go looking for answers. Now, community notice boards are another thing, and depending on your audience, these can still be very effective methods of getting your message out there. particularly for highly local events, because they're in areas where people frequent and pass and go looking for information. Finally, this might seem a bit obvious, but it can also be easily overlooked. If you have guest speakers involved in your CLE activity, or if you're working with a different venue, for example, maybe you're presenting at a library or at a community centre, they will likely be linked in with your target audience. So leverage their networks and find out how you can communicate through their channels. I'm going to briefly talk about social media and how to use your own channels effectively. In the past, what we've seen a bit is, you know, when using social media to engage with your target audience, posting on your own channel is usually only the first step. So don't stop there. And this is where in the past we've often seen people that just look to distribute their events through their own channels. Now, it's important to consider whether your target audience actually follows your account and is engaged with your content. Often that's not the case, or you're looking to extend beyond the people you already talk to. So only posting on your own channels, posting only on your own channels will go so far. So use social media as a way to engage in more targeted marketing and meet your audience where they are. Look for the organisations or accounts that they are connected with and trust, and approach those accounts to explain what you're offering, why it's relevant to their audience, and see if they can share your posts. Sending a private message can be a really effective way of doing this, and you may be surprised at people's willingness to help, because you're offering something of value that can really help people's lives. You might also want to consider paid promotion. Depending on your target audience, this may or may not be effective for reaching all groups, but it is another avenue and it is very inexpensive and a lot of the times worth trying. So really, to summarise my main message, it's in essence pretty simple. Consider your target audience in everything that you do. They're the reason you're doing this. So you actually want them to be there at your event and get the benefit of your expertise. So as Lisa, as I'll reiterate Lisa here, be targeted and tailored. Think about how they'll connect with your content, the language they use, the issues they face, and the benefits to them of coming along. Think about where they get their information and how. Think about who they trust and where they go for help or advice. And importantly, think about extending beyond your regular network of contacts and building relationships of mutual benefit. So really, there's a lot of different things you can try out there. And my main message is just have a go, try some different things, see what works, and hopefully you get the right people sitting in the room with you. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mick Paskos, who is going to talk about engaging with the media. Mick is the Director of On Message Media. He has more than 25 years' experience working in the media, including in media relations, publishing and journalism. He was the Managing Editor of the Law Institute of Victoria's Publications Department for more than 14 years and has been the Victorian Law Week publicist for the last 8 years. Thanks very much, Mick.
Thank you, Lisa and Matt, for that excellent coverage of today's topic thus far. And thank you, everyone, also for attending. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you. Everything that Lisa and Matt covered thus far is really a prerequisite to what I would like to spend the next about 10 minutes speaking with you about. And that is how to obtain traditional media coverage for your CLE activity. So to briefly recap Lisa and Matt, they spoke of, amongst other things, the importance of having a clearly defined target audience, really knowing your subject matter and being clear as to why you are presenting this particular event at this particular time. And all of this is really essential background and a starting point for trying to get traditional media. So I've used the term traditional media a couple of times already without defining it. So let's define it. By traditional media, we mainly mean newspapers, magazines, radio and television. But much of what works for these mediums can also apply to slightly less traditional media, such as websites, blogs, podcasts, and to a degree, social media as well. All right, we'll move on. So you've got this great event and you want publicity. You really want the media to cover it. So first of all, I like to ask, do I want media coverage before the event, during the event, post or after the event, or do I want all three? So maybe we might break them down a little bit first. Before the event, you might want pre-event coverage to help raise the profile of the issue or issues which are to be discussed. You might want pre-event coverage to get people to attend the event, to get bums on seats, so to speak. Or in this pandemic world, maybe we should change that to getting people to register for your webinars you've been so kind to do today. During the event, ask yourself, do I want the media to attend the event so that the media better understands the event for their reporting? With this in mind, ask yourself, will my event offer good opportunities for video for television or the web? Will my event offer good opportunities for audio grabs for radio news or longer radio formats? And in the world of social media, there is also the possibility that media attending your event might decide to post to, say, Twitter during your event. So if you think in terms of what your event might offer that might encourage a reporter, a producer, a radio person to attend, then there's some of the things that you can consider highlighting. Post-event coverage. This is media coverage of your event after it has occurred, which is what most media coverage consists of. But by thinking first in terms of before, during, and post-event media, this may help encourage you to try to get the media interested to attend before your event, before they actually report on it after the event. Now I'd like to talk about which media outlets to approach. Lisa and Matt spoke of knowing your audience when it comes to presenting a CLE event. And the same applies to getting media coverage for your event, in that it is really good to make sure you know what media audience options are out there. What are the possibilities? Now, because my role today is to focus on traditional media, I would say that the main traditional media options are community radio, community or local newspapers, major AM and FM radio stations, major newspapers such as The Age, The Herald Sun, The Saturday Paper, etc., television, websites, blogs and podcasts. So that's basically radio, print, telly, websites, blogs and podcasts. Now, in the above list, I deliberately separated out community radio from major radio and community newspapers from major newspapers and so on, as I'm hoping this assists you with seeing the range of potential options that are out there for media coverage of your event. Now, once you are aware of the range of potential options, ask yourself which media outlet would provide you with the best result. Would community radio coverage be the best outcome, or television, or is The Age or the Herald Sun where you would really want to be? Identify what you think will be the best media result for your event and chase that first. Now, I'd like to speak about the right person or program to approach. Once you have identified the type of media outlet you want to approach, ask yourself whether there is a particular program, section, reporter or presenter at that media outlet who will be most interested in your event. In terms of newspapers, certain reporters report on specific areas of news. It's called a round, a crime round, education round, etc. By reading The Age or Herald Sun over a few days, you should be able to identify if a particular reporter has a particular focus or round. Or you can use your favourite search engine to do a bit of research. Type in, for example, The Age education reporter or Herald Sun crime reporter and see what comes up. Social media is also a good place to learn more about the interests of people in the media. Now, still on newspapers, some newspapers list their contacts on their website. For example, if you Google Herald Sun contacts, it takes you to a full list of individual contact names and email addresses, including their email address for the Herald Sun news desk. When it comes to finding out who to approach and how to contact them in, say, community radio, a great starting point is the radio station's program guide, which lists all their programs and presenters. Both community radio stations 3CR and Triple R, for example, have excellent and easily accessible program grids on their websites. So by doing this sort of work first, it really helps target specific programs and specific people, and hopefully these being people who are interested in what you are doing. Next, I'd like to speak about actually contacting the media and how to get their interest. Okay, so you know the topic for your CLE event inside out. You know why you were putting on the event. You've done your research in terms of which media outlet, which program and which person to approach. What next? How do you actually approach them? Most media outlets will prefer that you send them a media release before you try and speak with them, and there are a number of reasons for this. A media release will confirm in the media's mind that the event is actually happening. And a good media release will provide the media with the key information they need to know to make a decision as to whether or not to look into your event further and possibly cover it. Journalists are very time poor, and if they have a choice between quickly scanning a well-written one-page media release versus a long and possibly rambling telephone conversation with someone, they'll choose a one-page media release every time. And that is irrespective of how important and how vital your event is. Journalists are just trying to make quick decisions and they need information in a distilled form. Now, due to the short time we have for today's webinar, we are unfortunately not in a position to go into detail about how to write a media release. So with that in mind, an excellent free resource on media release writing can be found by Googling or your Firefoxing or whichever search engine you use. I'll say Googling. AAP MediaNet, how to write a media release, with AAP MediaNet spelled as one word, AAP MediaNet. And I'll repeat that. Google AAP MediaNet, how to write a media release, and you will find excellent step-by-step instructions on how to write general media releases, how to write media releases with a focus on events, which is today's topic, and so on. Now, once you have written your media release, email it to the particular person or program at the media outlet you have identified. Then if you don't hear from them in a few days, try and call them as a follow-up. Most media outlets also have, have what is called a news desk email address, which is basically a central clearinghouse for media approaches. Excuse me, I might just have a slight sip of water. I'll repeat that point. So most media outlets also have what is called a news desk email address, which is basically a central clearinghouse for media approaches. It is often a good idea to CC your media release to them as well, just in case the person you have emailed is on leave. Finally, the coffee shop test. Now, I'm aware that media releases are very important and we have very limited time today. So I'd like to conclude with a strategy that might help with formulating your media release. And I call it the coffee shop test. And it's a test which helps you define the most important and interesting things about your event and its subject matter. Sometimes, because we are so close to an event, so passionate about it, or have been working on it for a long time, we can lose the ability to succinctly explain why the event is important and interesting. So take the coffee shop test. And by this I mean, imagine you catch up with a really good friend who does not work in your area of expertise. You're really excited about your project. You really want to tell them all about it, and you really want them to understand why it is so important. So imagine this, and then have that coffee shop conversation with yourself where you tell your friend in the way you would usually talk to them all about your event. Tell your friend why you're excited, what's happening, why it's important, when it's happening, what's new. And if you imagine that you're talking with a friend, you will find that by doing this, often it really helps you cut through to why it's important. It helps you identify your enthusiasm, and this can really build into your media releases, but also talking with the media. Now, in terms of CLE events, as I said, it might be that there's a change in the law. The event might be about the need to change a law. That you might have organised an amazing speaker. You might be launching new research. There might be an Australian Law Reform Commission or Victorian Law Reform Commission terms of reference. It might be all of this or something else. But these things will be some of the things that you might end up talking about in your coffee shop test and using in a media release. Now, I'm looking at the time, and unfortunately, my time today is now up. And I really hope that what I've said, building on Lisa and Matt, has provided some assistance and some tips that may help with obtaining media coverage for your CLE activity. All the very best. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Mick. Some really helpful tips there. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Nadia Morales from Inner Melbourne Community Legal. Nadia is the Director of Strategy, Engagement and Project. She has more than 20 years experience working in the domestic and international legal assistance sectors in legal practice, capacity building, service design and legal education roles. Thank you very much, Nadia.
Hi everyone, thanks for the introduction, Lisa. It's lovely to join everybody here today. Before I share an example of a Law Week event that Inner Melbourne Community Legal delivered last year, I'll start my presentation today with a very brief description of our organisation. Many of you are probably already familiar with us. For those of you who aren't, IMCL is an independent community legal centre working for social purpose based in Inner Melbourne for over 40 years. Our lawyers are experts in community law and are part of a small dedicated team that includes administrative and project staff supported by a financial counsellor, volunteer law students and a range of pro bono corporate partners. Slide, please. We promote access to justice through the provision of free and accessible legal assistance, education, advocacy and law reform. We work in close partnership with other community organisations in our area to reach people who might otherwise not access us. We target people experiencing financial and other forms of chronic disadvantage, and also those in an acutely vulnerable position due to adverse life events who are at risk of longer-term entrenched disadvantage. As Lisa said, legal education is a key access to justice strategy, and it is one of the 3 key pillars of our work. Like all streams of work, we always deliver at CLE in partnership with other organisations to enhance our reach and impact. Slide. Today we'll work through an example of a public Law Week event that we conducted during Law Week last year. In partnership with West Justice, we delivered a live interactive online legal information session, especially for international students. We had 102 registrations in advance and around 30 people attended the live session conducted via Zoom and Facebook Live on the day. The session was recorded and subsequently made accessible on VLF's website. In addition to being accessible on their website, we also embedded the video and a transcript on our own website. In total, the material has been accessed across all platforms around 1,000 times. Slide. In the presentation, I'll work through the approach we use to 1, identify who to target, and 2, how to market the event to them. As Lisa mentioned, we identified a very specific public audience to target for our workshop, international students. Slide. We've targeted international students and their unmet legal information needs for some years now. They were identified by us as a section of the community that was known through existing research to be particularly vulnerable to the experience of legal problems, but unfortunately, perversely unlikely to know that their problems are legal in nature with a legal solution, and so unlikely to seek appropriate help. Our research into their legal needs led to the development of an online legal education resource, co-designed with students using a human-centred design process, and it's accessible at ishelp.org.au. Building upon our resource and knowing that international students were at heightened risk during COVID-19, we identified them as a priority audience for Law Week and chose 3 key issues that we knew were affecting them during the pandemic: employment issues, safety, and housing. Slide. Our previous research had shown us that international students seek help and information online. So we knew that this also meant that students would very likely feel comfortable attending an online Law Week webinar and would have access to enabling technology like phones and laptops and also internet. We also knew from our research that they predominantly seek information and trust it from familiar sources within their student community, like advisors, student societies, and workers in the international student education sector. So we also identified these intermediaries as an additional audience to both attend the online session, but also to assist us to promote the event. Slide. We also knew the specific age of students, that most were about 20 to 24 and up to 35. This key demographic knowledge also helped us to be confident about the types of legal problems they would likely be experiencing based on their stage of life and the stage of their education journey in Victoria, and more specifically, the issues that were affecting them during COVID-19. Given their age, we also knew that we had to present the information in an accessible, fun and engaging way. We avoided a lecture style and used an interactive approach that we'll talk about later. Slide. Recognising that English is not their first language, we also considered other ways that we could make the content accessible to them. We chose to use scenario-based case studies framed as everyday problems rather than a legal problem. And that would both be relatable to students and their problems and also assist them to better comprehend the complex legal content. We used plain English and strayed away from legal terms. It's worth noting that if we were to do an event like this again, we'd also consider translating the content and using interpreters. Slide. This is an example of the case studies we use to contextualise the legal problems within the students' everyday life. We showed the case study during the presentation so that students could read it themselves, and we also read it out loud to help them understand, given that we were using English. Other examples including a boss unilaterally reducing a student's part-time working hours and reducing their hourly pay rate. We also talked about issues related to housing, like not getting a bond back, and also personal safety issues like a student feeling controlled by their partner and a student feeling being sexually harassed, by a fellow student at a university. Slide. After displaying and talking through each problem scenario, we used an interactive quiz through a platform called Kahoot so that students could actively take part in the webinar rather than just listen to us speaking about information. The aim was to help them to both test their own pre-existing knowledge and also retain the fundamental information after receiving more detailed legal information from us, including steps to get legal help. We displayed a question on the PowerPoint screen that could be viewed by those watching with multiple choice answers below. And then through signing into the Kahoot online, students were able to use their own device to select the right answer. We'd used this methodology previously during face-to-face activities and received very positive feedback from students, and so decided to incorporate this for the first time in a purely online environment, and it worked quite well. Slide. I'll now move on to a discussion about how we actually reached the audience. So once we knew who our target was and what we would deliver to them and how, we turned our minds to marketing the event. Knowing that they seek help online, we used common social media platforms to direct targeted posts to them and also to their networks. We used Twitter to reach people who work in the sector and could spread word among their networks rather than the students themselves, because Twitter is not a key platform that they use themselves to share information. To reach students, we used Facebook. We were able to readily target them as a Facebook audience through our existing IMCL followers, paid promotion, and also through specific international student pages and groups. Knowing how effective the Facebook strategy is from other work, we also used paid posts. Knowing demographic characteristics like age and geographic location, we were able to set very specific parameters for targeted promotion. With only $50, we reached almost 5,500 views, which led to a number of clicks through to the registration page. Notably, paid posts are also promoted automatically through Instagram, so we were able to passively harness that platform as well. We also posted on the walls of Facebook groups geared towards international students that were run by other institutions. For example, Study Melbourne runs the International Students of Victoria page, and we also gained access to pages that were set up by international students associations and support groups. Slide. As I mentioned, in addition to using our own social media channels, we also worked closely with other organisations and networks that had close connections directly with international students. We provided them with the content to share through their own communities and platforms. So in addition to social media platforms, we also worked with the City of Melbourne and they publicised the event through their student newsletter. We also worked with Insider Guides, and that's an online international student publication. And they also marketed the event through their social media platforms and through their website. We also worked with Study Melbourne, a student support service, and they distribute information about the event through their networks. We also worked with universities and student associations and support groups. Slide. In terms of the language that we used to market the event, we used very specific questions so that the audience was able to identify themselves as the target group and see that the content was relevant to their needs. For example, are you an international student, or do you work with international students? We also identified, as I mentioned, specific scenarios that we knew our audience was experiencing, and we related those scenarios to their everyday life problems rather than framing it in a legalistic way. For example, are you having problems at work? Are you unable to pay your rent, or are you being threatened with eviction? Is someone making you feel unhappy or unsafe during COVID-19? We also described benefits. Hear directly from community lawyers in an interactive activity. Get help for issues that you're experiencing during COVID-19. We also made a very explicit call to action. Book now. Slide. This is just an example of some of the promotion that we did. In the future, we'd probably also use more relatable graphics rather than just the Law Week imagery. And if you can show the next slide, Lisa. For example, this is some images that we use to promote our online resource IsHelp, which depicts an international student and is specifically designed so that they can identify that the content is relevant to them directly. Slide. And lastly, this was just another example of some of the information that we provided directly to their support services through a direct mail out using our email distribution list. That's all from me now. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Nadia. We've come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We run these Better Information sessions 4 times a year, and we hope you'll join us again. Have a great day.